Well, as he said, we're going to discuss a little bit about the guidance that is going to be coming out from SWGMAT regarding the report writing. And you're probably sitting out there saying to yourself, well, you know, how hard is that? All I'm going to do is tell what my findings were, and then we'll move on, and life will be good. Because really, all the contributing agency wants to know is whether or not he can go out and arrest his bad guy, and that's what we're looking to accomplish. What is the bottom line? They don't want to hear your ICP this or your GRIM 3 that, or how you measured something on your densitometer. What they want to know is the bottom line. Do they have the right guy? Are they really going to be able to make their case? Well, of course, it's never quite as easy as it would appear on the surface. And our reports as scientists have a tendency to look something more like this than the simple CSI scenario. If it floats, he's guilty. So we have all of this information up on our report, and it all goes out to our contributing agency, and this is what they're seeing from us. And there are some very good reasons for that, and this is what we're going to be publishing in our SWGMAT guidelines, the bottom line of what we believe that you need to put in a report. And let's just go over some of those things first so that you'll have an idea about what that we're actually going to make you put in there. So let's go back to the report. Well, first thing we want you to put in there is the title. That seems pretty obvious. We want you to put in the name and address and the location where the tests were carried out, if that's different from the name and address of your laboratory. We also want some sort of unique identifier for your report so that people will actually be able to tell this report from all of your other reports. We want a clear idea of the end of the report. We want some sort of indication on the pages so they know they're part of that report. And if you've ever glanced at any of these scientific reports before, you know you could lose a page and you might not even realize it. So we want to be able to make sure that when we send it all out, they actually acquire all of it, and that's what we're going to be seeing when we go to court. We want the name and address of the person you're sending it to. Again, that seems pretty obvious. If you don't have that, how are you actually going to issue your report? We would like you to also identify the methods that you use when you're actually analyzing the evidence. Now, again, that sounds pretty obvious to us, but there's an amazing number of laboratories that don't bother to include that piece of information. We want a unambiguous ID and a description of the evidence. We'd like the date when you actually got the evidence, especially if that date is critical. Now, the reason you want to put that in is well, in the cases where it is critical, you think about it, this is actually quite important. For instance, I got a case involving diatom analysis, and I got samples of pond water. And if that pond water had sat around, the population of the diatoms in it would have changed. So it's critical for me to know, and for the people who are receiving the report to know, when we actually got the specimens. Now, if you were paying attention, you'll notice that we've skipped from item number 7 down to item number 10. And you're probably wondering to yourself, well, what were those things that we skipped? This is the test results that we're seeing down here now, at item number 10. But number 8 is the date you actually performed the test. And you can look long and hard, and you will not find that in my report, and we'll get to that later. And a reference to the sampling plan and the procedures that you used if you actually did sample. Now, in this case, there was no sampling involved, so that information is not included. And that also is important to consider. You can put down all these guidelines of what you think you actually should have in the report, but if you didn't do that part of the test, there's no point in including it. If I haven't done any sampling, if I've analyzed the entire sample, then there's no point in me explaining what my sampling plan would have been had I bothered to do that. We also want to know who actually performed the test. A statement that the results that are in the report actually refer to the samples that you received and not to something else. And again, you'd think that that was fairly obvious, but as it comes out in some court cases, that is not always really obvious. Page numbers, and again, this actually kills a couple birds with one stone, because if you do your page numbers correctly, they cover also that you actually have all of your reports. So our page number, you'll notice, is page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2. That way you know when you have those 2 pages in your hand, you have the entire report. Now again, you will notice that we just went from item number 13 to item number 18. And if you're paying attention, you're now alarmed. What are the 5 things that we have skipped? What we have circled right now are the opinions and interpretations, if you bothered to make any. But the items that we've also skipped down here are also, again, they're things that were not done in this case, and so are not included in this report. Things like deviations from our procedures, if we bothered to have any sort of information that was specific to the testing conditions about environmental conditions. So if my instrument is sensitive to temperature, and that day it was running 90 degrees in the lab, which occasionally happens at our facility, you need to actually include that in the report, that your results may not be reliable because of that. Any sort of statement that you were not compliant with any regulations or specifications. Estimates of measurement uncertainty, if you actually measured things. And that will get us down to number 18. So you're thinking to yourself, how many of these guidelines, how many of these things do you actually want us to put in the report? Well, so let's take a look at a comprehensive list of everything that we want you to have in there. Let's take a minute, take it all in. 27, 28, 29, 30. 30 items that the SWIG thinks that you should be including in your report. Look them over, think about them. So by now that you've had a chance to take a look at them and absorb them a little bit in your brain, you are probably sitting out there thinking to yourself, dear God, what are you people on this thing do? Are you in there smoking crack? Well, let's take a step back and consider what we already have to put in our reports. And if you look back at the requirements that ISO has given to us, ISO IEC 17025, which if you are not familiar with it yet, you will be soon, are the requirements for testing and calibration laboratories. They've set out a number of these requirements, and actually the vast majority of the things that are required by this guideline are required by ISO. ISO was modified slightly by the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation Guide 19, ILAC Guide 19. And they actually loosened some of the requirements a little bit. ILAC Guide 19, which was actually echoed by AskLab Lab International's requirements, they have allowed us a little bit of an out, and we'll discuss that in a minute as well. So, things are not actually as bad as they may seem on the surface. In addition to that, we also, in the federal government, we are guided by the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 16, which talks about what we must tell the court if we are asked. So we have to provide our qualifications, we have to provide what our opinions will be if we are going to render any, we have to give a summation of what our court testimony will likely be if we are asked, and those are all things that are listed in our guideline as things that you should disclose when you are doing reporting, where it's relevant, and actually those are where they're requested. But in addition to that, you also have all your local and state guidelines as well. Everybody has their own little rules that their particular court and jurisdiction requires for them to actually put out. So you may actually have more things that you have to tell them in addition to all these things that we already have up there for you. So let's consider that little out that ILAC Guide 19 and AskLab have allowed for us. They looked down and they considered this, and they thought exactly what you all did when you saw our 30 requirements. You people must be crazy. And they thought, reasonably so, it's going to be very difficult to include all of this in a report. And so they allow us 3 options. First one, we can put it all in the report if we choose to do so. Or we can prepare an appendix to the report and put all of this as like an addendum at the back. You'll have your little executive summary up the front, you'll have all this data in the back, and you're good to go. Or you have to make sure that all this information is somehow memorialized in your case notes or in your laboratory documentation, so it could be provided if you were asked for it. Now, here's where SWGMAT takes this step beyond what is actually required by all of these guidelines. We really don't believe that that standard is sufficient, especially since the requirement for that is that you memorialize what your choice is in your QA manual. So somewhere in your QA manual, you have to have a statement that says, our laboratory will not be providing all the data in all the cases. We're actually going to leave it in our laboratory files. And that would be sufficient. We want you, the SWG wants you to put that statement in all of your reports. Because when your report goes out to your local agency, they don't know to ask for your QA manual to find out what you've done with all your data. They're not going to be able to figure that out, not unless they know you pretty well and you've already told them yourself that, hey, that's in the QA manual. If you want all the rest of the data, you can ask for it. We want you to be upfront. We want you to tell them in your report, this is where it is. You can have it if you ask for it. Now, you're still sitting out there, I'm sure, thinking, there's no way that this is going to happen. No way, no way. Not to us. Can't happen. If we do what the SWG is telling us, it's going to make our reports cumbersome. It's going to make them confusing. I'm going to have to testify to more things in court. This is just a ridiculous requirement. Well, in response to that, yeah, it could actually make your reports fairly cumbersome. If you choose to provide all this information in your initial report and not to just archive it and put that one little statement in there, yes, it could make your reports quite long. But they don't have to be confusing unless you're a poor writer. You should be able to write your report so that your results are understood. And yes, it may cause you to have to explain more things in court, but that will happen only initially, in my opinion. Now, of course, I can't know that for sure. I can't predict the future any more than the rest of us can. But we actually feel that it is better to be transparent. That if they can actually see everything that you have done and assess all of your data, that you may actually be asked fewer questions in court, because now when they're seeing your underlying data, they understand that you actually did do a good job. You actually did run through all the steps. You do have all your QA analyses. There are less things that they can attack you on, and there's no point in asking you about this stuff in court. So this may actually end up protecting you some. And if it doesn't, well, que sera, sera, because, you know, when I do a report, I do the best job possible that I can, and if the defense wants to hammer me on them, we'll bring it on. I have done my best job, and, you know, if I cannot defend my science, well, you know, maybe my science deserves to be excluded. More people are likely to get called to testify. Now, this is because one of the requirements is that if you subcontract out any of your work, you're going to have to identify the people who have subcontracted for you, and that these people might then have to testify instead of you. Well, you know, you shouldn't be testifying to other people's results anyway, and so if your experts that you're relying on to form your reports get called, well, you know, so be it. That actually, I think, is not a bad thing either. The lay people wouldn't understand my scientific information anyway, so why should I put it in there? And let me just say right out that that's incredibly patronizing. You should be able to write clear enough that people will actually understand your report. And even if they can't, you need to put in your little executive summary at the front. Here's what my actual opinion is. Here's what we're actually saying with this. And if they want to delve deeply into the data, they can. If they want to skip it, they have that option as well. The client doesn't care. And actually, I'll agree with that. Probably 90% of the time, the client doesn't care, but sometimes they do. And the bottom line is that this will be a requirement through many types of accreditation, so it's not like we have any choice in this matter anyway. And finally, we've always done it this way, and my laboratory director is not going to allow me to change. Well, and you know, there's not a whole lot that I can do about that, but I think that actually once the guideline is issued, you will have some ammunition to allow you to actually be more forthcoming with your information. Because really we should be. We should be fairly transparent in what we're doing. A lot of people are suspicious about us because we are hiding in our ivory tower behind our conclusion, and we are not providing the information that people need to understand our reports. So what is my personal opinion on what the bottom line is? Most of the things that we are requiring you to do are window dressing. So things like putting in the unambiguous ID of all of your samples, the name of the client, things like that, that stuff is boilerplate. Even things about your sampling techniques and references to your SOPs, all that stuff is boilerplate as well. You can take care of that with a macro in your reporting, and it'll just automatically go into your report, and you're done. What you need to think about on a day-to-day basis about putting in a report is the very minimum that you need for clarity, so that somebody, when reading your report, can actually understand what you have to say. And the first step of that is to put in a statement of how you analyzed your samples. If they don't know how you analyze your samples, it's hard for them to tell whether or not your data is actually reliable or whether you're just making it up. And what weight they can put on your evidence. So I'd like you to put down how you actually analyzed your samples. And we do put that in our reports. There'll be a little paragraph in there that for this report, I did perform these tests on these analyses. And again, it's boilerplate. It's actually very easy to put in there. You got to put your results in. This is a scientific report. You are reporting your data. You do need to put in your results. That's pretty obvious. And again, you know, that's something that goes in every one of our reports. And finally, your interpretations and your opinion. If you're going to render an opinion in a court case, they have a right to know up front what it's going to be. So if you're going to put out an opinion, we want you to commit to it. We want you to put it in your paper. We want you to put it in your report, so that they have some way of knowing what you're actually going to testify to when they call you. And for us, of course, again, that's a little statement that is specific to each one of our cases. Now, this is the sorts of opinions that we typically put in our reports, but yours is going to be specific, again, to your type of evidence and what you're actually doing. But this is what the SWIG would like to see in your report. Now, I've given this talk before to the actual SWIG itself, and I got criticized by somebody who shall remain nameless about not having owned up to the fact that while these guidelines are out there from all these accrediting bodies about what we actually need to put in our report, the fact of the matter is that when the GLASS group actually wrote this document, we came up with these things independently of looking at all of the guidance that had been provided by ISO and ASCLD, things like that. We believe that this should be put in your report because we want you to be clear, we want them to understand, we want people to actually see that you really are doing science. You may have less challenges because of it. This is what we think is necessary for you to have in your report, and we will own up to it. You know, we now know that we're in good company. But this is what we'd like for you to have in your reports. I think with that, we'll turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.